18,000 students expelled. 7 national museums stripped of funding. $4.2 billion frozen overnight. And in one historic showdown inside the U.S. Capitol, broadcast to 330 million Americans, Jasmine Crockett unleashed a fury that ripped Kellyanne Conway to shreds. The chamber erupted like a battlefield. Propaganda clashed with truth, and for 39 agonizing seconds Conway stood paralyzed before the nation. Was this the day America finally witnessed the collapse of Trump's cultural crusade? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The roar of helicopters thundered above Washington today, their shadows slicing across the marble dome of the Capitol like circling vultures. Crowds pressed against the barricades, signs raised high, voices clashing in a deafening storm. Some screaming "and the woke lies," while others roared "justice now." News trucks lined every street, satellite dishes pointed at the sky, beaming every second of this spectacle to a nation glued to their screens. It didn't feel like a hearing anymore. It felt like the prelude to a political earthquake. Inside the chamber, the atmosphere was suffocating. Reporters jammed shoulder to shoulder in the press box, microphones trembling in their hands. Every face turned toward the 2 empty seats at the center, the seats reserved for Jasmine Crockett and Kellyanne Conway. Even the lawmakers sitting in their polished leather chairs fidgeted nervously, aware that this wasn't just another partisan clash. This was a collision course between 2 forces of nature, each carrying the hopes and fury of millions. The silence was heavy, broken only by the snapping clicks of photographers who could sense history waiting to ignite. Then Jasmine Crockett entered. She didn't drift in quietly, she stormed in with the kind of presence that cracked through the tension like lightning. Her heels struck the floor with defiance, her eyes blazing as if she carried the ghosts of every student denied a scholarship, every museum stripped of history, every athlete robbed of their chance. She looked less like a congresswoman and more like a soldier returning to finish a war. People whispered her name in hushed awe, as though speaking it too loudly might spark fire. To her supporters, she wasn't just Jasmine Crockett. She was their sword, their shield, their last line of defense against the tidal wave of erasure that her pupils betrayed. A flicker of unease. 2 worlds stood facing each other, one fueled by lived pain and righteous defiance, the other by polished propaganda and relentless ambition. The tension was unbearable, like a wire pulled to the brink of snapping. In living rooms across America, millions leaned forward, parents, students, veterans, workers, everyone sensed it. This was not politics as usual. This was a reckoning. Anchors dropped their voices to whispers, their words cutting through the silence like knives. Today, the nation asks a single question: what happens when truth collides with propaganda? Live before the world. Kellyanne Conway leaned into the microphone as if she were addressing not just the chamber, but the soul of America itself. Her voice rang sharp, rehearsed, laced with that practiced authority she had carried since her White House days. Donald Trump has saved America's culture from being hijacked, she declared, her words slicing the silence like a blade. He has rescued our traditions from the claws of political correctness. He has stood against the madness of wokeness and given this nation its pride back. Applause erupted from a small cluster of Republican allies seated behind her, but it was forced, hollow, a sharp contrast to the tense stares of students, activists, veterans, and athletes who filled the chamber's gallery. Their faces told a different story, the story of people living the consequences of Trump's decrees. A young woman in a worn-out college hoodie gripped a railing, her knuckles white. Beside her, a veteran in uniform shook his head slowly, lips pressed tight as Conway continued her tirade. She smirked, feeding off the cameras, her cadence picking up speed. Look at our sports, ladies and gentlemen. Under Trump, we put an end to the circus of men invading women's fields. Look at our corporations, no more wasting millions pandering to woke activists. Look at our museums, no more taxpayer money funding lies that divide us. This is not regression. This is restoration. Each phrase landed with the weight of a verdict, but behind her polished delivery, there was venom. Jasmine Crockett sat still, her gaze locked on Conway. She hadn't moved a muscle since Conway began, but her silence wasn't weakness. It was the silence before lightning. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, follow every word like a hawk circling prey. She tapped one finger against the table, slowly, rhythmically, like a war drum only she could hear. The room could feel it too, an energy building. Dangerous, inevitable. Conway's voice grew bolder, her tone dripping mockery. This is what leadership looks like, not pandering to fringe activists, not bowing to chaos in the streets. Trump has restored dignity to our culture. He has reminded Americans what real values are, and to those who cry about being silenced. Maybe your voices never deserved to be heard in the first place. The words hung heavy in the air, poisonous and deliberate. Gasps rippled through the audience. One student shouted, "Liar!" Before being hushed by security, Conway's smile widened as if she had drawn blood. She leaned back in her chair, confident, certain that her performance had landed. The chamber was tense, pulsing with unspoken rage and anticipation. Outside, across millions of screens, Americans leaned forward, feeling the storm forming just beyond the horizon. At the witness table, Jasmine remained motionless, her silence deafening. Her chest rose once, then stilled, as if she were summoning every wound, every injustice, every stolen future into a single unbreakable focus. The storm had not yet struck, but everyone in the room felt it, the way air grows heavy before thunder shatters the sky. And then came the question lingering in every mind, unspoken but undeniable. Can one voice cut through a wall of lies? And will today be the day the world finds out? The silence after Conway's last barb stretched like a blade over the chamber. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then suddenly, bang! Jasmine Crockett shot to her feet, slamming her stack of notes against the table so hard that pens rattled, and aides flinched. The sound cut through the chamber like thunder, and all eyes locked on her. Her voice exploded, sharp and searing. "Real Americans? Tell me, Ms. Conway, who gets to decide who counts as real? You, Donald Trump, or the millions of people you've tried to erase?" The audience gasped. Some clapped instinctively, others held their breath. Conway's smirk returned, but her eyes betrayed a flicker, a microsecond of unease she couldn't hide. Jasmine didn't give her time to recover. She leaned forward, her words a barrage. 18,000 students expelled, 7 national museums gutted, 4.2 billion in education stolen from our children, scholarships for women athletes defunded. Tell me, Ms. Conway, which part of that looks like saving America? Every sentence landed like a hammer blow. A veteran in the gallery nodded, fists clenched. A college student wiped a tear, whispering, "Finally, someone's saying it." The chamber felt less like a hearing and more like a courtroom where Conway was the defendant and Jasmine the unflinching prosecutor. Conway let out a sharp laugh, tilting her head as if brushing off a child. "You're just a puppet," she sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. The words echoed, bouncing off marble walls, a desperate jab at control. But Jasmine was ready. Her eyes narrowed, her voice dropped lower, steadier, more lethal. "I puppet? Better a puppet of justice than a mouthpiece for a failed dictator." The line sliced through the air, electrifying the chamber. Gasps turned into applause, swelling into a roar. Phones lit up as aides, students, and even reporters recorded the moment, their hands shaking with adrenaline. Conway shifted in her chair, still forcing her smirk, but her shoulders tightened. Her nails dug into the armrest. She could feel the narrative slipping. Jasmine didn't just counter her, she shattered her shield and left her naked before the cameras. Yet the danger was real. Millions were watching. Conway, seasoned in propaganda, could still twist this moment, and Jasmine knew it. The line between victory and disaster was razor thin. For a second, the nose died down, leaving only the heavy breathing of two women locked in combat. Jasmine stood tall, her figure backlit by the searing spotlight, her face carved with defiance. Conway sat, her smirk wavering, eyes darting toward the cameras as if searching for a lifeline. The entire nation hung suspended, watching the clash not just of two women, but of two visions of America colliding in real time. And as the tension surged to breaking point, a single thought haunted every viewer. Was this the first crack in Kellyanne Conway's armor, or the moment Jasmine Crockett risked everything on a war she could not afford to lose? Conway leaned forward, her smirk hardening into a mask of righteous certainty. She had been rattled by Jasmine's strike, but now she clawed her way back into control, drawing on the weapon she knew best, nostalgia. Her voice rose, clear, calculated, perfectly tuned for the cameras. "Let me remind America what Donald Trump has given back to us. Look at Cracker Barrel, once hijacked by a woke agenda, now proudly restored to its original spirit. Look at the Kennedy Center, no longer a playground for drag propaganda, but a sanctuary for real American art. Look at our sports teams, the Washington Redskins, a name that carried tradition for decades, stolen in the name of political correctness. Under Trump, those traditions are alive again. The words were chosen like daggers, designed to stab at memory and longing. A ripple passed through the chamber. In the gallery, a handful of older veterans nodded slowly, their eyes misting as if hearing echoes of a past they remembered with pride. But across the aisle, students in hoodies and activists with clenched fists shook their heads in disbelief, their faces burning with anger. The divide in the room wasn't just visible, it was raw, pulsing, alive. Conway pressed harder, her cadence tightening into a preacher's rhythm. The left doesn't want history preserved. They want it erased. They tear down statues, rewrite textbooks, strip our traditions bare until nothing is left but guilt and shame. They tell our children to hate this country instead of love. 8. But Donald Trump said no. He stood up. And he gave America's pride back. Gasps swept through the crowd as she built momentum, her voice dripping disdain. She paused, let the silence thicken, then delivered her sharpest blow. At least Donald Trump protects our daughters' sports from men in disguise. The chamber erupted into chaos. Students in the balcony. The energy in the room was unbearable, a pressure cooker ready to explode. Conway leaned back, smug, confident that she had seized back control. Around her, Republicans murmured approval. Across the aisle, fists pounded desks in outrage. America itself seemed to hold its breath, teetering between two visions of reality. And then, in that charged silence, the only question that mattered rose like smoke in every mind. Will Jasmine let that venomous strike stand unanswered? Or is Conway about to regret every word she just spoke? The smug curve of Conway's smile hadn't even settled when Jasmine Crockett moved. In one fluid motion, she stood and hurled a thick, heavy folder onto the witness table. The thud echoed through the chamber like a gavel of judgment. Gasps shot through the room as papers scattered across the polished wood. Jasmine's voice cracked like a whip. 2,347 women lost their scholarships under this so-called protection you celebrate. She yanked a stack of pages free and held them high for the cameras, the names printed in black ink glaring like gravestones. These are not numbers, these are daughters, athletes, scholars, dreams stolen. Futures erased. Madison Green, track star, Ohio, gone. Kayla Rodriguez, volleyball captain, Texas, gone. Claire O'Donnell, swimming prodigy, Michigan, gone. One by one, Conway, they vanished, not because they weren't good enough, but because your president decided their identities were inconvenient. The audience reeled, a collective gasp rippling like a wave. Phones rose into the air, screens capturing every syllable, every trembling name. A young woman in the gallery suddenly stood, tears streaming down her cheeks, her voice cracked, trembling, but fierce. We don't need Conway's protection. We need fairness. Her words detonated in the chamber. Activists rose to their feet, clapping, shouting. Veterans shifted uneasily, realizing the argument had become flesh and blood before their eyes. Conway stiffened in her chair, her hand clutching the armrest so tightly her knuckles bleached white. She forced a laugh, but it landed brittle, hollow. Jasmine turned, eyes ablaze, refusing to let the moment pass. She spread another sheet across the table. For a heartbeat, Jasmine stood motionless, letting the fury she had unleashed hang like fire in the air. Then she leaned back, her eyes locked on Conway with a final slash of defiance. The crowd roared again, a sound not of politics but of uprising, and, across every screen in America, one question blazed into focus, unavoidable, undeniable. How long can Kellyanne Conway keep her mask from shattering under the weight of truth? Conway's composure cracked for only a second before she snapped her spine straight and forced her voice back into the spotlight. She lifted her chin, her words pitched louder, trying to reclaim authority. Donald Trump restored pride at the Kennedy Center. She declared, the syllables sharp, desperate. He saved it from degeneracy, from being twisted into a circus of drag shows and leftist propaganda. He gave Americans their stage back. A thin ripple of claps echoed from the Republican bench, but it was brittle, unconvincing. Jasmine didn't flinch. She leaned forward, her glare searing across the chamber. Her voice came fast, hot, unstoppable. Pry. You dare call that pry? He didn't restore anything. He fired artists, silenced voices, and replaced them with puppets spewing propaganda. Pry. This isn't patriotism, it's censorship, dictatorship dressed up as culture. The words detonated, ricocheting through the hall. A murmur surged into shouts, then into a chant that rolled like thunder from the gallery. Shame, shame, shame. Students pounded their fists on the railing, veterans shifted in their seats with darkened brows, and activists raised their fists high. The chamber transformed into a cauldron, the chant pounding with the rhythm of a protest. Conway's face drained as the cameras zoomed in. She reached for her glass of water, fingers trembling, gripping the rim so tightly it rattled against the table. She tried to mask the motion with a smirk, but the lens betrayed her. Millions of viewers saw the twitch in her jaw, the way her eyes flicked sideways, the way confidence bled from her like sand slipping through fingers. Jasmine's voice climbed higher, each word burning hotter than the last. America's pride doesn't come from silencing stories. It doesn't come from erasing history. It doesn't come from banning identities. Pride comes from truth, and every time you and Trump silence truth, you silence America itself. The audience erupted, some on their feet, others pounding their desks, the chant growing into a roar that drowned even the gavels pounding. The sound was primal, electric, the sound of a nation recognizing its voice inside Jasmine's words. Conway pressed her lips into a tight line, clutching her glass like a lifeline. The mask of control she had worn for years, the armor she had polished to perfection, was slipping under the white-hot glare of lights, and the merciless truth flung at her. Reporters scribbled furiously. The chant of shame, shame, shame was still shaking the marble walls when Conway suddenly snapped forward, her knuckles slamming the table. Her voice, sharp and venomous, cut through the roar. You don't know real America, Jasmine. You've never known it. You're just a radical left pawn, dancing for applause while the country burns. The words dripped with scorn, a desperate swing to claw back control. The audience fell into a stunned hush, waiting for the counter-strike. Jasmine didn't flinch. She straightened, eyes blazing, and her reply landed with the weight of a guillotine. Better a pawn of justice than a queen of deceit. The crowd erupted like an explosion. Students leapt to their feet, clapping furiously. Activists shouted in unison. Even some veterans who had sat stone-faced earlier slammed their palms against the railing. The chamber pulsed with rowdy electricity, a living organism feeding on Jasmine's defiance. Conway forced a laugh, but it cracked mid-breath. She pivoted fast, latching onto a familiar weapon: fear. And while you grandstand, foreign students are stealing American spots in our universities. Chinese students, Middle Eastern students, flooding our campuses, pushing our children aside. Trump put America first. You put America last. Murmurs erupted, some nodding grimly, others hissing in outrage. The line was poisonous, designed to stoke division, and Conway wielded it with the cold precision of a blade. But Jasmine was ready. She snatched a sheet from her folder and thrust it into the air. Facts don't bow to fear, she thundered. International students contribute $40 billion a year to our economy. They fund our labs. They keep our universities alive. They fuel breakthroughs in medicine, in engineering, in technology. Without them, half our institutions would collapse. Gasps spread through the chamber as numbers lit up the screens behind her. Charts, statistics, evidence, a tidal wave of truth crashing against Conway's flimsy barricade of slogans. And let me be crystal clear, Jasmine pressed, her voice rising. Every time you demonize these students, you endanger the very future you claim to protect. You're not defending America, you're strangling it. Conway's face twitched, her smirk faltering under the heat of Jasmine's assault. She reached for her water again, hands trembling, her once controlled posture unraveling under the unrelenting spotlight. The crowd smelled blood, and their energy surged like fire in dry grass. Phones shot upward, recording every second. Anchors outside the Capitol spoke over one another in shock. This isn't a hearing anymore. This is a trial, and Kellyanne Conway is. Jasmine's voice cut once more. Lower now, colder, every syllable a knife. Fear has never built a nation. Facts have. And today, America must choose which path it will follow. The chamber vibrated with silence, the weight of her words pressing down on every chest, and across a divided nation, the only question that mattered echoed like a drumbeat through every home. Will America surrender to fear, or stand with the unforgiving truth of facts? The chamber had barely settled from Jasmine's data assault when she struck again, this time with precision so sharp it could cut bone. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Conway like a predator fixing its prey, and her voice dropped to a lethal calm. Which students, Kellyanne? Name one. The words hung in the air like a blade suspended above the table. Conway's lips parted slightly, then closed again. Her eyes darted from her notes to the cameras, to the lawmakers staring at her, then back to Jasmine's unyielding gaze. The silence that followed was suffocating. Seconds ticked like gunshots. 1, 2, 3. By the 7th second, reporters in the press box had stopped writing, their pens hovering midair. By the 15th, cameras zoomed in so close that every twitch of Conway's jaw, every bead of sweat on her temple, was captured in merciless high definition. By the 21st, the audience began to murmur, their voices rising into a low tide of disbelief and tension. It was unbearable. The gallery shifted restlessly, students whispering, veterans shaking their heads, activists holding their breath. Millions watching from home leaned closer to their screens, counting each tick of the clock with a kind of horrified fascination. 24, 25, 26. For 27 excruciating seconds, Kellyanne Conway, Trump's fiercest defender, the woman who had outacted reporters and spun entire news cycles, sat frozen, paralyzed under the weight of a question she could not answer. Her fingers trembled against her glass of water, nails clicking against the rim in a staccato rhythm of panic. The silence was no longer just silence, it was collapse, broadcast live across the nation. Jasmine let it breathe. She didn't rush to fill the void, she didn't need to. She simply leaned in, her voice low, steady, devastating. That silence you hear, that is the sound of lies collapsing. The chamber erupted. Students shot to their feet, clapping, shouting. Activists roared with approval. Even some lawmakers who had sat stone-faced joined the surge of no's. The chant began, again, louder, heavier, rolling like thunder against marble. Shame, shame, shame. Conway's face flushed crimson, her forced smile twitching, her eyes darting anywhere but Jasmine's. The cameras captured it all, her unraveling laid bare for millions to witness in real time. Anchors on live broadcasts interrupted each other. Jasmine remained standing, her posture straight, her expression carved from stone. She didn't shout, she didn't gloat. She simply let the roar of the people carry her words, amplifying them beyond anything Conway could drown out. And in that moment, across every screen in America, one chilling thought lodged itself into the minds of viewers. Had Kellyanne Conway just lost the nation's trust in real time? And was Jasmine Crockett the one who ripped the mask away? The chant of shame, shame, shame rolled like thunder across the chamber, but suddenly it shifted, splintering into something louder, fiercer. Activists in the gallery rose as one, fists punching the air, their voices merged into a deafening declaration. We are America. The sound hit like a tidal wave. Jasmine turned toward them, her eyes fierce, her voice amplifying the cry with a force that shook the walls. This, she shouted, her hands sweeping across the crowd. This is the America you're trying to erase. The gallery exploded, students stomping their feet, veterans raising their hands, parents clutching their children with tears streaking down their cheeks. The chamber was no longer an audience, it had transformed into a living jury, and their verdict was erupting. In real time, the energy was so raw, so electric, even the gavel pounding desperately for order was drowned out, like a whisper in a hurricane. Conway's lips parted, fumbling to reassert control. This is chaos. This is mob rule. Her words stumbled over each other, her rehearsed lines unraveling into stammers. She clutched her notes, flipping frantically, her fingers trembling as she searched for something, anything, that might restore her footing. But every line she spat landed flat, hollow, devoured by the roar of the chamber. Cameras zoomed in mercilessly, catching every flicker of panic, every tightening of her jaw. One headline flashed across live broadcasts within minutes. Crockett crushes Conway. America watches the mask slip. On phones, on laptops, on TVs across the country. The moment was going viral before Conway could even finish her broken sentence. Jasmine seized the opening with the instinct of a seasoned warrior. She stepped closer to the microphone, her voice slicing through the nose with surgical precision. "You call this chaos? No, Kellyanne. This is democracy waking up. This is truth breaking the chains you've wrapped around it. And the only thing collapsing here," she pointed directly at Conway, her finger steady, unwavering, "is the lie you've been selling to America." The audience roared again, louder than before, the chant returning with a new ferocity. "Justice, justice, justice." The walls shook with it, the marble floor vibrating beneath their feet. Conway blinked rapidly, her mouth opening, then closing, her usual smirk erased, replaced with something raw. Fear. The spectacle was no longer just a hearing. It had become a trial by fire, with millions of Americans as jurors, watching. A woman once feared for her silver tongue now stumble, sputter, and burn under the heat of unrelenting truth. And as the camera panned across the chamber, Jasmine standing tall, Conway visibly unraveling, one haunting thought spread across the nation like wildfire. But can Jasmine keep her grip on this tidal wave, or will Conway, clawing for survival, find one last strike to turn the storm back in her favor? The roar of justice, justice, still echoed through the chamber when Conway suddenly slammed her palm against the table, her voice rising with a sharp edge, desperate to reclaim ground. "Enough of this hysteria," she barked, her words slicing through the chants. Her eyes scanned the cameras, her tone turning theatrical, almost rehearsed. "Donald Trump has done what no leader before him dared to do. He ended the lies poisoning our culture. No more divisive stories, no more fake ideologies. That is what leadership looks like." The chamber stilled, as if bracing for impact. Conway pressed on, leaning into her moment. "Take the Smithsonian, for example. Under Trump's order, it will no longer waste taxpayer dollars fueling narratives designed to divide Americans by race and gender. The National Museum of African American History and Culture, filled with resentment, teaching our children to despise their country. The Women's History Museum, nothing but propaganda glorifying fringe ideologies and men pretending to be women." She smirked, her words venom disguised as conviction. The reaction was instant. Gasps tore through the audience, sharp and visceral. Activists shouted in fury. Students rose from their seats, their voices colliding into a wall of outrage. One man in the back yelled, "That's our history," while a young woman screamed, "How dare you erase us?" Security shifted uneasily, the chamber threatening to fracture under the weight of rage. Jasmine's fists tightened at her sides, her knuckles whitening. She didn't speak yet, not because she lacked words, but because she was holding them back, forging them into something sharper than steel. Her jaw clenched, her chest rose and fell in steady rhythm. The camera caught it all, the storm building behind her eyes, the fire she was about to unleash. Conway, sensing the anger, but mistaking it for weakness, doubled down. "We don't need museums teaching victimhood. We don't need exhibits turning America's story into a pity party. What this country needs is unity, one history, one culture, one truth." She jabbed her finger toward Jasmine. "And people like you, Ms. Crockett, would rather rip America apart than tell its children the truth about their greatness." The chamber erupted in chaos. Cries of lies thundered from the gallery, drowned only by the pounding of the gavel. Reporters scribbled furiously. Commentators outside cut into live feeds, their voices breathless. Conway just went after the African American History Museum. "This is unprecedented." Jasmine remained seated, but her silence was volcanic. Every muscle in her body vibrated with restraint, her eyes burning holes into Conway across the table. She wasn't just preparing to answer a political point. She was preparing to defend the very existence of communities that had been written out, silenced, erased for centuries. And as the tension cooled tighter, the question loomed over the chamber, heavy and unavoidable. How do you fight the erasure of an entire people with nothing but the unrelenting force of truth? The chamber was still rattling from Conway's attack. When Jasmine finally rose, her fists unclenching as she placed her palms firmly on the table. The room hushed, the fury of activists simmering into silence, as if everyone sensed that what was about to come was heavier than statistics, sharper than rebuttals. Jasmine's voice was low at first, but it carried, steady, deliberate, carved, with conviction. "I want to tell you a story," she began, her eyes never leaving Conway's. The audience leaned in, instinctively aware that something deeper was unfolding. Jasmine's tone shifted, cinematic, pulling every ear closer. "Last summer, a black family walked into the National Museum of African American History and Culture. 3 generations, a grandmother in her Sunday best, her daughter, and a little boy no older than 7. For the first time, that grandmother saw her ancestors' history displayed, the chains they wore, the hymns they sang, the schools they built from nothing. She stood there, in tears, telling her grandson, 'This is who we are. This is why we survived.'" The chamber froze, the words sinking like lead into the marble floor. Jasmine's voice grew firmer, rising with the rhythm of a heartbeat. "That little boy looked up at her and said, 'Grandma, they put us in the story. Do you understand what that means, Kellyanne?' After centuries of being erased, that child saw himself in America's history for the very first time." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Some covered their mouths, others wiped at their eyes. Activists who had been shouting moments earlier now stood motionless, tears streaking down their faces. Veterans shifted uncomfortably, their stern discipline faltering under the weight of the image Jasmine had painted. She didn't stop. She leaned closer, her voice now razor-sharp. "And you want to strip that away? You call that propaganda? Tell me, Kellyanne, whose history is inconvenient to you? Whose story do you want to erase?" Conway opened her mouth. Conway shifted in her chair, her polished armor in shards, her smirk reduced to a trembling line. And as the crowd surged to its feet, one question pulsed like a drumbeat through the chamber, through every screen in America. Can one story of truth burn brighter than 1,000 distortions of power? For a moment, the chamber sat frozen in the echo of Jasmine's question. Then, out of the silence, a single voice cut through like a blade. A man in uniform, his medals glinting under the harsh lights, rose from the gallery. His voice was gravel, but it carried the weight of battlefields and sacrifice. "I fought for freedom," he thundered, "not censorship." The words detonated. The chamber erupted into chaos, gasps, cheers, the pounding of fists on desks. Students shot to their feet, activists roared approval, even lawmakers leaned forward, electrified by the explosion of raw defiance. Cameras swiveled instantly to the veteran, capturing the tear trembling in the corner of his eye, his jaw set like stone. Anchors outside scrambled over each other's voices. A veteran just stood up. "This hearing has turned into a battlefield." Jasmine seized the moment like a general commanding an army. She spun toward the crowd, her voice rising, each syllable a drumbeat. "Art is America's heartbeat," she declared, her words punching through the roar. "And when you silence it, you don't protect this nation, you kill it." The gallery thundered in response, chants colliding with applause until the chamber shook like a storm. Conway tried to interject, her voice straining to be heard over the tempest. This is hysteria. You're destroying order." But her words cracked mid-sentence, breaking under the weight of the chaos she could no longer control. The microphones betrayed her, amplifying the quiver in her tone, the fracture in her once unshakable delivery. She gripped the edges of the table, her knuckles bone white, but the mask was gone. Every viewer at home saw it, not the polished strategist, but a cornered woman unraveling before the nation. Jasmine stepped forward, her figure framed by the blaze of cameras, her voice lowering into a razor's whisper that sliced deeper than any shout. "You can bend exhibits, you can tear down stories, but you will never erase truth, and every second you try, you prove why America needs voices louder than yours." The gallery exploded again. The chant of "justice, justice," rolled through the chamber like an earthquake, drowning Conway's sputtered protests. Security guards exchanged uneasy glances, the gavel slammed desperately for order, but the noise was unstoppable, primal, the sound of a nation reclaiming its breath. Conway's shoulders sagged, her lips moving soundlessly as if searching for lines that had abandoned her. The camera zoomed in tight, capturing the tremor of her hands, the glisten of sweat at her temple. She was no longer in command of the stage, she was trapped in it, exposed. The chamber was still vibrating from the chants of "justice, justice." When Conway lurched forward, slamming her hand against the microphone, her voice cracked like glass under pressure, shrill and desperate. "You're dividing us, Jasmine," she shouted, her face contorted with fury. "Every word out of your mouth drives Americans further apart. You don't want unity. You want chaos. The words rang hollow, but Conway hurled them with venom, trying to claw back control. Her finger jabbed the air, her body leaning forward as though sheer force could drown out the tidal wave Jasmine had unleashed. Her voice pitched higher, shaking, a thread of hysteria woven into every syllable. Jasmine didn't flinch. She rose slowly, every movement deliberate, as though the storm around her bent to her pace. Her voice dropped to a low, steady burn, yet carried like thunder across the chamber. "No, Kellyanne," she said, her eyes cutting into her opponent. "Division is not when people demand to be seen. Division is when you erase identities to fit your box. Division is when you silence millions just to preserve your fantasy of unity." The crowd erupted in cheers, a thunderclap that shook the rafters. Activists shouted, fists pounding on the rails. A mother in the gallery held her daughter tight, tears streaking her face. She cried out, "That's the truth." The chant swelled again, this time sharper, angrier, a living verdict echoing through marble and wood. Conway's face flushed crimson, her smirk gone, her jaw tight as she spat into the mic. "This isn't about erasure, it's about protecting America from people like you. People who want to turn our history into a pity parade. People who think identity is more important than loyalty." Her words flew out in fragments, tripping over themselves, wage drowning coherence. Jasmine struck back without hesitation, her voice cutting the air like a blade. "Identity is loyalty. Loyalty to truth, to justice, to the America that exists outside your bubble. When you erase people's stories, you don't unify the country, you strangle it." The chamber roared again, the sound deafening, primal. Phones captured every angle, social media feeds exploded in real time. Hashtags surged across the country, hashtag Crockett unites, hashtag Conway divides. Headlines flashed on breaking news tickers: Conway cracks under fire, Crockett dominates. Conway's chest heaved, her hands trembling as she tried to gather herself. She looked out at the audience, but instead of support, she saw a sea of eyes glaring back at her, unrelenting, unforgiving. She turned back toward Jasmine, but her words faltered before they even reached her lips. Jasmine leaned closer to the mic, her voice sharp, precise, unyielding. "You don't get to lecture me about unity, Kellyanne. Unity doesn't come from silencing voices. It comes from hearing them, and the only thing your version of America is united in is fear." The chamber detonated, the sound a mix of fury and triumph, like the roar of a stadium when the final goal is struck. Conway recoiled, her shoulders tightening, her breath ragged. For the first time, the image was undeniable. Kellyanne Conway wasn't leading this fight, she was losing it. And across the nation, a single thought spread like fire. How much longer before the pressure shatters her completely, and Conway snaps under the weight of her own unraveling? The chamber thundered with the chant, "Justice, justice, justice," pounding like war drums against the marble walls. It wasn't just noise, it was an uprising. The voices swelled, louder and louder, rising in waves that drowned every gavel strike, every call for order. The sound poured through cameras into living rooms across America, a nation watching, not just a hearing, but a reckoning. Conway's face burned crimson, her composure unraveling with each echo. She slammed her hands on the table and leaned into the mic, her voice raw, shrill. "This is mob rule," she screamed, her words cracking as they scraped against the roar. "This isn't democracy, this is anarchy." But her voice only fed the fire. The chant surged, a tidal wave engulfing her accusations. Activists pounded the gallery rails, veterans stomped their boots, students waved signs in the air. The camera zoomed tight on Conway's trembling hands, the quiver of her lip, the panic in her darting eyes. Millions at home saw it. The once polished strategist unraveling under the roar of the people she claimed to speak for. And then Jasmine rose, not shouting, but steady, commanding, her voice cutting through the chaos with the clarity of a bell. "No, Kellyanne," she said, her gaze sweeping across the chamber like a searchlight. "This isn't mob rule, this is democracy finding its voice." The words struck like lightning. The chamber froze for a beat, the chant suspended in midair. Then the silence shattered into an explosion of cheers so loud it rattled the glass panes. The gallery became a storm, the floor a battlefield. and Jasmine the unflinching general standing at its center. Conway recoiled, her chair screeching as she pushed back, sweat glistening under the glare of the lights. She tried again, her voice cracking against the tidal wave. "You're destroying order. You're tearing this country apart." But her words collapsed under the audience's defiance, swallowed whole before they could land. Jasmine's eyes narrowed, her tone sharpened into a blade. "Order without justice is tyranny. Silence dressed as unity is a lie." The people. The roar returned, louder than before, a living verdict impossible to suppress. Reporters scribbled frantically. Live news tickers flashed across screens. Crockett commands the crowd. Conway cornered. Hashtags ignited on social media. Hashtag Justice Errors. Hashtag Conway cracks. Hashtag Crockett rises. America wasn't just watching. It was joining. Conway gripped her glass of water with trembling fingers, taking a shallow sip that cameras magnified into a symbol of collapse. Her eyes darted desperately for allies, but even her own side sat stiff, unwilling to meet her gaze, and Jasmine stood taller, framed by the roar, her words echoing above it all. "This is not chaos. This is America, remembering its power." The audience erupted once more, unstoppable, uncontainable, and as Conway's shoulders sagged beneath the avalanche of sound, one chilling question gripped every viewer across the nation. Can Kellyanne Conway survive the roar of the people, or is this the sound of her legacy crumbling into dust? The roar of the chamber was still rising when Jasmine leaned into the microphone, her voice calm but edged with fire. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her words came like a blade sliding between armor. "You can't cancel freedom, Kellyanne. You can only reveal your fear of it." For a beat, silence rippled across the chamber, as though everyone understood they had just heard something that would outlive the moment. Then the explosion came. The crowd erupted in cheers, gasps, and frantic applause. Phones shot into the air, hundreds of them, capturing the instant from every angle. The glow of screens lit up the gallery like a constellation. Conway's chest heaved as if every breath were a battle. Her hands trembled against the table, but suddenly she lurched forward, her voice ripping through the chamber, ragged and incoherent. "Wokeness is poison," she screamed, the veins in her neck straining under the lights. "You're destroying America. You, and people like you. You're tearing this country apart, turning us into a laughingstock." Her words poured out in fragments, wild and unhinged, no longer sharp or calculated but desperate, like a dam bursting under pressure. The crowd froze for a heartbeat, shocked by the unraveling of a woman once known for her ruthless composure. Phones zoomed in, capturing every quiver, every crack in her voice. The mighty spin master was now sputtering, screaming, drowning in her own fury. Jasmine didn't rush to interrupt. She stood tall, letting Conway thrash in the quicksand of her meltdown, letting the nation see what desperation looks like under fluorescent lights and unblinking cameras. When she finally spoke, her tone was calm, steady, lethal. "No, Kellyanne," she said, her voice carrying across the chamber with surgical precision. "Lies are poison, and you've overdosed." The words landed like a thunderclap. A collective gasp tore from the crowd, followed by an eruption of cheers so loud it drowned out Conway's sputtering protests. Students leapt to their feet, fists raised. Veterans pounded the gallery rails, even reporters glanced at one another with stunned disbelief, recognizing instantly that they had just witnessed the kill shot of the night. Conway tried to speak again, her voice cracking into a shrill squeal. "You don't get it. You don't know real America." But the words tumbled over each other, incoherent, swallowed by the chants and laughter echoing around her. Her face burned crimson, sweat glistening at her temple, her hands shaking so violently she nearly spilled the glass of water she clung to like a lifeline. Meanwhile, Jasmine stood motionless, her silence more powerful than any rebuttal. She didn't gloat, she didn't smirk, she let the roar of the people carry her, let the moment expand, until Conway was left a trembling figure unraveling in the middle of the storm. The contrast was searing. One woman calm, composed, unshaken, the other unraveling before millions of eyes. Cameras captured it all, the flicker of panic in Conway's eyes, the icy steel in Jasmine's gaze. News anchors outside were breathless. We are witnessing the collapse of Kellyanne Conway's composure live on national television. Social media detonated, hashtags multiplying by the second. The lies are poison, and you've overdosed was already being printed on t-shirts, chanted at protests, etched into the bloodstream of American culture. The chamber felt less like a hearing and more like an execution, not by violence, but by truth so sharp it left no escape. Conway sat hunched, trembling, the fire gone from her voice. Jasmine towered above her, the crowd behind her, the nation leaning forward into its screens, and yet, amid the wreckage, one question still lingered in the air, heavy, unavoidable. Was this the end of Kellyanne Conway's fight, or would desperation drive her to strike back one final time? The chamber was still trembling from the aftershock of Conway's meltdown when Jasmine moved. She didn't rise in anger or rush to shout over the chaos. Instead, she turned slowly, deliberately, her gaze shifting past the lawmakers, past Conway's crumbling figure, straight into the unblinking eye of the camera. For a moment, it felt as if the entire nation stopped breathing. Her voice came low, steady, commanding. To every American watching, your freedom, your culture, your truth belongs to you. Not to Trump, not to Conway, to you. The words rang like a bell across the chamber, clear and undeniable, carrying through the air with the weight of something destined to be remembered. The audience erupted in an ovation so thunderous it seemed to shake the very. Jasmine didn't glance at her. She didn't need to. She kept her eyes locked on the camera, speaking not to the chamber but to the millions watching across living rooms, classrooms, diners, and airports. You've been told your stories don't matter, that your identities are threats, that your voices should be silent. But silence is not unity, silence is death. And tonight, she paused, letting the word reverberate, her gaze sharp as steel. America has chosen to speak. The gallery erupted again, people on their feet, clapping, stomping, crying, shouting. Reporters scrambled, their pens flying across pages, their voices crackling with excitement into live feeds. Screens across the nation lit up with headlines. In real time, Crockett's finishing blow, America belongs to the people. Clips of her line ricocheted through social media, instantly captioned, instantly shared, flooding the digital bloodstream with the image of Jasmine standing tall against the storm. Conway sat slumped, dwarfed by the ovation, her attempts at rebuttal drowned before they even left her lips. Cameras caught her blinking rapidly, lips pressed into a thin, trembling line. For perhaps the first time in her public career, she looked not like the master manipulator, but like a relic of a dying order, cornered by truth and consumed by it. Jasmine stepped back from the mic, letting the ovation swell higher, letting the people carry her words into eternity. Her face was calm, her eyes steady, her posture unshakable. She didn't need to say more. She had struck the blow, and America had answered. And across every glowing screen, in every corner of the country, one question burned into the minds of millions. Will this night be remembered as the collapse of Kellyanne Conway, or the undeniable rise of Jasmine Crockett? Conway leaned forward one final time, clutching the microphone as though it could anchor her drowning voice. Her mouth opened, desperate to reclaim authority. You don't understand. Trump, the words faltered, tangled in her throat. She tried again, her lips moving, but only fragments stumbled out, incoherent and broken. The chamber fell still, waiting. Seconds dragged, heavy and merciless. Cameras zoomed in close, capturing every blink, every tremor of her jaw. 5 seconds. 10. The silence. By dawn the next day, America was on fire. News cycles exploded, cable networks cutting into regular programming with flashing banners. Crockett's strike leaves Conway in silence. Pundits shouted across split screens, some calling Jasmine Crockett a warrior for democracy, others decrying her as the face of radical chaos. But no one denied the truth. Kellyanne Conway had been humiliated before millions, and the footage was now etched into the bloodstream of the nation. Social media was an inferno. The clip of Jasmine's line, "Lies are poison, and you've overdosed," racked up tens of millions of views overnight. Hashtags surged. Hashtag Crockett crushed Conway. Hashtag Justice roars. Hashtag Silence 39. Memes, remixes, and protest chants carried her words into the streets. One image went viral instantly. Jasmine walking tall, head high, while Conway slumped in silence beside her microphone. a portrait of power-shifting hands. Across the country, the debate spilled into diners, barbershops, classrooms, and factory floors. In a bar outside Detroit, veterans argued whether Conway had disgraced herself or exposed the fragility of Trump's cultural crusade. In a diner in Atlanta, a group of students replayed the clip on loop, cheering every time Conway froze. Online forums turned into battlegrounds, one side clinging to Conway's collapse as biased theater, the other hailing Jasmine as the voice America had been waiting for. Editorials framed it as a turning point. Op-eds asked if Conway's silence marked not just her defeat, but the crumbling of a movement built on fear. Politicians scrambled to respond, some distancing themselves from Conway, others doubling down. The tremors of that hearing were no longer confined to the Capitol. They were spreading, shaking the foundation of a divided nation. And as the country argued, one question pulsed beneath the nose, impossible to ignore. Will this moment fade into the chaos of America's news cycle, or will Jasmine's defiance ignite a movement too powerful to silence? The heavy doors of the Capitol swung open, and Jasmine Crockett stepped into the night air. The floodlights blinded for a moment, but then came the roar, not of politicians, not of pundits, but of ordinary Americans. A surge of people pressed forward, their voices breaking into cries of gratitude, their hands reaching for hers as though touching her meant touching history itself. Veterans in uniform snapped to attention, saluting her with tears welling in eyes hardened by war. One leaned forward, gripping her arm. "You fought for us in there," he whispered, voice trembling, "the way we fought for freedom out here." Students wrapped their arms around her, some sobbing openly, clutching her jacket as if afraid. Jasmine stood at the center of the storm of humanity, her face lit by camera flashes and raw emotion. She leaned down to hug a young girl clinging to her leg, then looked up at the sea of faces. Her voice, low but clear, carried through the chaos. Like a prayer, "This fight was never mine alone," she whispered, her words trembling with weight. "It's ours." The crowd erupted, chants of ours, 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 reverberating into the night, a sound more powerful than any headline. Cameras captured the moment, but even they couldn't contain it. The electricity of a people reclaiming their place in the story. And as Jasmine disappeared into the embrace of those she had fought for, one haunting question surged through every watching heart. Can one voice truly spark a nation's conscience, or has Jasmine lit a fire that nothing can extinguish? The crowd outside the Capitol was still roaring when Jasmine stepped onto the steps, cameras flashing like lightning all around her. She didn't raise her fist or shout over the nose. Instead, she turned to face the nation through the lens of the cameras, her posture steady, her expression carved in steel. The world leaned in as her voice broke through the chaos, measured but resonant, every syllable striking like a hammer on iron. "No precedent should be above the law," she declared, her gaze unflinching. "No community should be erased. And let us be clear tonight, America is not fear. It is freedom." The words didn't just echo. They detonated, carrying through the air, spilling into every living room, diner, and barbershop across the country. Behind her, the crowd surged in applause, the sound raw and unstoppable. Cameras captured the cinematic sweep, the American flag rippling in the night air, illuminated against the Capitol dome. Faces of every color and creed pressed together in unity. Veterans saluting with tears in their eyes, mothers clutching their children, students chanting until their voices cracked. Some wept openly, their tears not of sorrow, but of recognition, of hope long denied and suddenly reborn. Jasmine let the ovation thunder, her silhouette framed by the storm of light and sound. Then, with a final glance into the camera, her voice dropped lower, sharper, as if speaking directly into the hearts of every viewer. "If your freedom was threatened, would you stay silent or would you fight back?" The screen froze on her face, the flag waving behind her, the crowd still erupting. And across a divided nation, millions were left with a choice that could no longer be avoided. True strength is not measured by how loudly we shout, but by how bravely we stand when truth is under attack. Jasmine's fight reminds us that freedom is fragile. It survives only when ordinary people refuse to be silenced. Erasure, fear, and lies will always try to divide us, but unity born from courage can overcome them all. The question now belongs to each of us. When your freedom is tested, will you raise your voice, or let the silence decide? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.